perspective? What's impressed you the most?
Yeah, it's like one of those situations where you looked at that non-conference play, and I think they're 303rd nationally in strength of schedule from non-conference. It's like, all right, let's get to the meat of SEC play, and we'll see how legit this team is. And they've really shown it. I mean, even that Alabama game, like they played a good half of basketball. They just had one kind of bad 20-minute stretch there. That's kind of it. And this group just works together. It's one of those situations where I felt like every single one of these newcomers have really complemented and gotten the most out of Meechie Johnson. And when you're able to do that and you find the right pieces out of the portal, I think everybody's trying to find the right guys out of the portal, but the guys that also elevate your returners, that's where you see like a special combination here. And so I think that that's what South Carolina has really done. Like Talon Cooper, he was a guy that last year at Minnesota, I wasn't sure if he was necessarily a winning player. He had a lot of turnovers. He made a lot of plays. Like the raw assist numbers look good, but the turnovers were jarring. Sometimes it felt like the spacing that he brought to the floor was a little bit of an issue. And this year, his ability just to sidle up next to Meechie and add just something different, take the ball out of his hands a little bit, get him more into a score first role where he can kind of set the table and get Meechie going. That feels like a great combination for both guys. And I think we're seeing the best basketball from both Meechie Johnson and Talon Cooper. And I think Lamont Paris has a big reason why. That he's a really big reason why both these guys are meshing together and playing at a high level.
So this is, if you subscribe to the Big Spur, by the way, this is on the front page of the Big Spur. JC, I know you want to jump in and ask a question, but I do really have to read word for word the first sentence that you wrote in this column here, Isaac. And I'm going to quote it here. These are his words, not mine, of course. But quote, "If you still have a DVD player," in parentheses, "I don't. I'm a 97 kid. And a handy 1899, I don't. I'm a writer." You can rent a DVD from Hoops King to get inside Bo Ryan's brain and learn all about the transition defense that made Wisconsin one of college basketball's premier programs since 2000. That's a brilliant start to that thing. I just want to give you a round of applause. Well done, dude.
Appreciate it. Yeah, that one kind of came out of nowhere, and I'm happy for it. Like I'm happy it went well, but I mean it's legit true. Like you see some of the numbers right now and this transition defense is locked in and really, really good. And it's easy to see some of the parallels between what Wisconsin was. And, you know, I'm from the Midwest, right? I was born and raised in Illinois. So I've seen Wisconsin basketball. I'm real familiar with it. And so when you see South Carolina too, it's like, I know this story. I know how this works. And teams just do not get easy buckets against them in transition. Part of it is they do a good job of not turning the basketball over as well. But they're very dialed in with their transition defense, picking guys up, not allowing open threes. It's a really, really good recipe to keep yourself in ball games.
Isn't it crazy? Like from like little youth league, church league, little kids. Like the first thing I remember my coach telling me when I was 7 and walked on a basketball court: get back on defense and get your hands up. Isn't it amazing how that one fundamental that's preached since the beginning of time makes a huge difference at the college level? I mean,
it's absurd.
So Illinois. So are you a Chicagoland?
I'm a small town in central Illinois. We had like 5,000 people there, right? But basketball is king in central Illinois. Yeah. So that's where I'm at.
It's like around Bloomington Normal. So but you live in central Illinois still?
I'm currently up in Chicago, but yeah, I'm from the central Illinois area. Yeah.
Well, you're about to be friends.
Yeah, I live in Chicago. I live outside. I live in Homer Glen, which is in Will County near Joliet, Orland, and all that in the southwest suburbs.
Looks like we're going to get some Pequods together later.
Yeah, so it's like, you know, but yeah, my wife is actually from here, so I'm kind of I'm loaned. I'm on loan from the South for a little while.
Isaac, before we get any further into this, all right, let's get you're from that area. JC does this all the time, so we're gonna force him to do this. Give us your Chicago accent, see, and let's get a judge on whether this is real or fake. Come on,
man. I'm honestly not the guy for this, but like,
no, JC. We're gonna get JC to do it. But you give him a rating.
Yeah, he's Central Illinois. Central Illinois. The further south you get, the more they sound like us. Like if you go much further past Champaign, they're like, "Hey, how you doing? What's going on? I live in the land of Lincoln. How about you?" But yeah, they ran a guy for governor up here that talked like that. I was like, that's a bad. He's never going to win in Chicago. But yeah, you know, up here in Chicago, we got the beef sandwich, we got Portillo's, we got the Bears. They suck. They're terrible. Ryan Poles I don't know if he's going to trade Justin Fields or not. And the Bulls with Billy Donovan. Oh, my God. And the Blackhawks, they had that kid. He's good. He's got a broken jaw now. I just don't think they're ever going to come back. And don't even get me started about the White Sox. And we don't talk about the Cubs because they're a tourist attraction.
Isaac?
I mean, if that's not a 10 out of 10, I don't know what is. That's that's really good.
Yeah. Well,
okay. All right. Now give him your Coach Orgeron impression, and let's get him to grade this one. You can do it.
I'll say this right now. I don't know if I can go from Chicago to Coach O at the same time, but I'll say this. I'm having a good time down here in Destin, Florida. I've got my $18 million I'm counting. I take a big bath in a tub of butter with 2 naked women and sing Go Tigers. Don't mess with me. I'll come into the shrimp basket with my shirt off and fight you right now because I'm Coach O celebrating endless summer. We have a hard body contest at 5 o'clock on the beach. J.C. Sherbert, the 2-time defending champion. He will be here. Anyway, I could go on and on, man.
Are
but
you
this
ever
is your
come back
segment,
on with
Isaac.
us or no?
It's your segment, Isaac. We want to talk to you.
I wasn't very specific with Isaac about why he was coming on.
No.
He's about to have technology problems here in a second.
Yeah, I had no idea you were in Chicago. That's awesome. So, but anyway, okay. So the Bo Ryan thing. So getting back on you followed obviously Big Ten basketball for a long, long time. Before they hired, I guess, Coach Bennett, before Ryan, it was Coach Bennett. They weren't very good, right? They had a national championship, I think, in the 40s, and that was it. But in the Big Ten is a tough conference year in and year out with some traditional powers, although Purdue will never win the national championship, in my opinion. They're going to get beat in the Sweet 16 again this year like they always do. And Purdue Pete is a horrifying mascot. Nevertheless, I digress. So they got Coach Bennett in there. He has obviously, you see what his son does at Virginia. It's a distinct style. Bo Ryan, same way. Now Greg Gard. If you're South Carolina, this program was a powerhouse in the 70s in the ACC in a different era of basketball. Since that point, they have an SEC championship in 97 and a Final Four run in 2017 that came out of nowhere. You look around the SEC and you see the athleticism. You see the coaches in this league. Texas and Oklahoma are coming in. You got one NCAA tournament in 19 years. Do you think it was somewhat smart to maybe say, hey, let's be different? Let's not be Kentucky or Alabama. Or let's go out there and do things a little different, with an eye toward what Wisconsin's been able to accomplish for the better part of 2 decades now in the Big Ten.
No, I think it's a good point. It's also one of those situations where it's like, yeah, we're different, but like this wins games in the regular season. And like this gives us a chance. And the one thing that I keep noticing with South Carolina too is like, usually we talk about basketball, like transition defense, you usually have to sacrifice something. That one thing you sacrifice is usually offensive rebounding. South Carolina is a really good offensive rebounding team too. So they're doing both. They're offensive rebounding and getting second chance opportunities at a high level. Oh, and we're going to go get back in transition and make sure we have a really fortified transition defense. So I think it's a good point of trying to find ways to win differently. But I still think you need athletes, right? And South Carolina does have that a little bit as well. Like Colin Murray-Boyles, like I'm already read all in on that guy, like being a really, really big time piece. I was looking at some numbers preparing for this a little bit. Did you know that South Carolina's defense, when you against high major competition, right, like top 150 nationally, their defensive rating with Murray-Boyles on the floor is 90. When he's off the floor, it's about 105. That's a 15-point swing per 100 possessions, right? He is a complete game changer for them. So he gives them that like SEC, like super twitchy athlete that you normally see mixed with a different style. And I think that's kind of the brilliance of what Lamont and this crew and this coaching staff has really dialed into.
I'm glad you hit on that because it really is like anytime Lamont really speaks and you know in some more in-depth interviews, not just courtside or whatever, he always says it's not just having players, but it's having the right players for what he's trying to do. So it's like he has gone out and everybody's like, well, it's a team full of transfers, but I mean, he's really zeroed in on who he wants and feels is going to fit this perfectly.
Yeah, and the other thing too, I think a lot about like one-way versus two-way guys. And like, I think a lot of times in the past, Michi Johnson was kind of viewed as a one-way guy. I think he's tapping into a little bit more of a two-way guy than he is. Like what we've seen from Miles Studi this year, like all right, I have a bias of basketball players. I like 6'7" dudes that hit threes but can't dribble. That's my bias. Miles Stutie's my guy, right? Like that's the type of player that I like because he fits all of those different things. But I think we've seen a different version from him this year. Like it's not just catch and shoot threes. He's able to do a little bit more off the bounce this year. You're seeing him get a little bit more deflections this year, especially defensively. And so like how many two-way guys can you stack on this roster? Whether that's from the portal, whether that's developing them, whether that's recruiting them from the high school ranks. That's like the thing that I keep looking at. And it feels like South Carolina is way more two-way guys than I thought that they initially had in the preseason and what they had last year for sure.
You know, a couple of man, you've got some great observations. So I want to add a couple of things to this. One on CMB, that ball comes off the rim, boy, he snatches it out of the air, doesn't he? I mean, it is aggressive stuff. But I want to go back to Michi for a minute because Michi he's had some struggles offensively the last few games, and obviously from a fan's perspective, that is concerning to people. I'm not so sure that it's concerning to Lamont Paris. When you heard him, I don't know if you heard it specifically, but we did after the last game, he was talking about BJ Mack and BJ was struggling from long range in the game, but Lamont's like, shoot it, you're open, shoot it, you're open, shoot it, you're open. And he had struggled earlier in the year and then he got hot and got going. Also earlier in the year, Josh Gray really disappeared. I mean, here's a guy who kind of felt like he was part of this program, Isaac, and had some growing pains, didn't even play for a couple of games, was getting 2-3 minutes and nothing, and ran off the floor before one game was even over, ran to the locker room on his own, didn't shake hands. You felt like things could go, I don't know, here. So I'm trying to figure out the exact right way to ask this question, but I might have to ask a two-parter here to you. Number one, what have you seen and learned about Lamont Paris's ability to create a healthy locker room, especially when you bring in all of these transfers? It's look what's been going on in Arkansas. That's number one. Number two, what have you learned and seen about Lamont Paris, about how he has helped his players grow through their struggles and their issues in season and still feel like they have a role on the team?
Yeah, I think winning helps, right? Winning makes every locker room come together
100%.
in a big way. Yeah. And so that's a huge thing. But I think proof of concept is also super, super important. And like you look early in the year, maybe that Grand Canyon win should have told us a little bit more because that's a really talented team, right? But that proof of concept, like they saw it a little bit against Clemson, but I thought that Mississippi State game was really like that. Hey, here's where we're at. Like our program is at a different spot than what we might have initially thought, because Mississippi State will beat the hell out of you, and they're super, super physical. And I felt like South Carolina took a lot of those blows and pushed back and punched back in a really big way. And then I thought we saw a lot of those same principles against Tennessee. That Tennessee defense is super, super physical. And I felt like South Carolina wasn't scared about that at all. They were really, really finishing through contact. BJ Mack finishing through contact at a high level as well. And so I think that buy-in is a little bit easier because, you know, the one thing we talk a lot about is like, have you gotten transfers from winning programs? South Carolina didn't do that, right? Like BJ Mack, they won a decent amount of games at Wofford. That's a good team there. But like Miles Stuttie, like Vanderbilt wasn't great last year. Talon Cooper, Minnesota wasn't great last year. Like you kind of look at those. I mean, even Michi Johnson, Ohio State's a decent team, but he wasn't a huge part of like that winning program that they had there. He was only there a couple years. So like his ability to take guys from losing cultures and get them to all buy in on winning, that's maybe as more important to me than almost anything. Like he does that from the X's and O's perspective, because this just doesn't happen. We see teams from Arkansas, all of their transfers are from losing teams for the most part. And it's kind of been a disaster this year, as you said.
Yeah, and then the guys that came back from South Carolina obviously have not had a whole ton of success. But they lost a school record 21 games last year, so that was some good moments. You mentioned Talon Cooper, obviously being a Big Ten guy. He was really good at distributing the basketball on a not so good Minnesota team last year. Can you tell any difference between his game from last year to this year? It seems like his shots falling a little more. He's a little bit more of a scoring threat, but still a pretty elite distributor of the basketball.
He looks way more comfortable get into his spot from three, especially. There were times where he was really hesitant to really fire that thing up. Even though he had good percentages, it was almost like one of those guys that's like, hey, I know I'm shooting mid-30s from three, so I'm not going to take a ton of attempts, so I keep that number in that 38.5, 36% range, and that looks better. This year, I feel like he's just playing with a lot of confidence. And he was huge against Tennessee, right? The 4 threes are there, but the consistency lately too. I think he's made multiple threes in 6 of his last 7 games, shooting over 50% from 3-point range in SEC play is a game changer. And when you're able to add that, I just feel like we talk a ton about like development and getting transfers and stuff like that, but getting old helps too. And this is a 5th-year senior, right? Playing his best basketball of his life. And I think it's coming at just the right time. It's like, that's what I love about college basketball. There's still a place for development in college. Like, you don't necessarily have to jump to the next level right away. And his ability just to get better and better and better and better. And this is his best basketball he's playing. I think the assist numbers aren't necessarily as eye-popping as last year, but I still think his decision-making has been better. That turnover rate is way down compared to what it was in the past, and his potential assist numbers are high too. Guys are just missing shots, right? He's creating good looks. They'll change his assist rate or assist numbers a little bit too. So I've been impressed with him. You look at this backcourt compared to the rest of the SEC. I mean, Michi Johnson and Talon Cooper together, I don't think would have been number 1 in the preseason or maybe even top 5, but they've been as good as almost anybody in the league throughout this year, which is pretty impressive.
Yeah, if you can get Michi hitting at the rate in which he can hit, watch out. I mean, they could be dangerous in a hurry. When Bo was coaching, or Coach Ryan was coaching at Wisconsin, and the same thing with Coach Greg Gard, do you feel like when you see them on the floor, do you feel like you see a reflection of Bo Ryan out there in those players? Or is there every year, is there one player in particular? You don't have to name the player, but just the casual question. When Wisconsin plays basketball, do you feel like there's one guy on the field or collectively a group of guys that directly reflect the head coach, how they act, how they move, all those type things?
No doubt. Yeah. No, I mean, when I think of Wisconsin basketball player, I think of Brad Davison taking 1 billion charges and knocking down clutch threes, right? Like, that's what I think of with Wisconsin. But I do think, like, you have to have if your point guard's an extension of the head coach, that's obviously a big deal. And Wisconsin's guard play lately has been really, really darn good, and their ability to change too. They've evolved and changed. And the thing I keep thinking about, like with Wisconsin, South Carolina, is like, hey, do you have like that second gear that you can get to? Like, hey, we're going to probably play at a lower tempo. We're probably going to try to grind out these games. You have that second gear, that killer gear that you can get to. I didn't know if South Carolina had that until they beat Kentucky by 17, until they ran away from them a little bit. And that's where like Wisconsin this year, they have that killer gear. South Carolina's having that killer gear a little bit more lately. If that can stick, if that can change and be something that you can rely on moving forward, that's where I feel like you could start to think about, hey, like, is there a roadmap for, Wisconsin to win the Big Ten, which they might? And is there a roadmap for South Carolina to potentially win the SEC, which they have a chance to, which sounds bonkers in February 1st compared to where we were a couple months ago?
I asked you that question because when I want you to answer the same question for Lamont, you kind of just did, but like when you see Lamont Paris on the sideline and then you watch he may even made the comment the other day. He said, sometimes that's why I don't call a lot of timeouts. I tell my guys, you got yourself in this mess, you got to get yourself out of it. It's really fascinating. It's been fascinating because last year, full transparency here, Isaac, I don't want to say I was critical, and who the hell am I to be critical? I'm a nobody. I don't know anything about what Lamont's forgotten more basketball than I'll ever know. But I didn't know like who they were or what they were trying to be. It didn't make any sense to me. I've watched Gamecock basketball for almost 40 years, and watching this strange dynamic where you've got G.G. Jackson and what do we do with him? He needs the ball and he wants to be the guy. And then you had all these other dudes and it was really discombobulated and it seemed broken and fractured. And it was like, oh, golly, what are they trying to do here? But it looked like he came in, instead of being the coach, it's like, all right, well, I'm going to adjust what I do to the talent that I have. He came in and said, no, this is going to be my system and we're going to recruit to it. And so now when I see these guys running around the floor, personally speaking, that's why I wanted to ask you, it looks like 5 of them nurses out there. They're coaching each other. They communicate well. It's been fascinating to see the turnaround.
Yeah, it's connected. They're really connected. And, I think it takes time too. Like those early years at Chattanooga weren't very good, right? Like I think they were 10-23 in his first year, maybe 12-20 in his second year. And it took a little bit of time for him to kind of get going a little bit. And by the end of it, that Chattanooga team probably had a chance to beat Illinois in that first round of the NCAA tournament in 2022, just to the last play there. It felt like they started to feel like him again. And that's where I felt like the South Carolina group, like it needed a little bit of time. Like last year in the SEC, there's so many brand new coaches. And I remember talking to a couple people who watched South Carolina a ton, and they're like, did we hire the worst coach? Like, are we in a worse spot than all of these other first-year coaches? I think that was a legit conversation that people were having. Now, things are completely different because, like you said, this is connected. And whatever they had last year compared to what they have this year, it feels just like a breath of fresh air, doesn't it? It just is. Almost like a completely different team, and that's a big credit.
This is a hard question, and it's not a fair one. Do you think they would have been better without GG Jackson last year?
Boy, I don't know, man. Right? Like I don't know. I think it just kind of depends on what you do, right? Like if you don't take GG, does that mean you look for something different in the transfer portal? You're trying to get a little bit older with that extra spot there. Like, yeah, I don't think he necessarily helped them. I think he's a great player. Like we've seen at Memphis, I think he's had a really, really nice year, his development and everything. I just don't know if he was ready to be the number one guy as a young guy in the SEC with their new first-year coach, with a bunch of newcomers and a new system. It felt like everything went wrong that could go wrong. So maybe I think you might be right if they go in the portal and maybe add some more of a veteran flavor. But that group had a lot more issues than just GG, even though he had his fair share of issues as well.
And JC has said this numerous times. There was no way that they weren't taking GG Jackson. You had to take GG Jackson. He's the best player in the country. He's in your backyard. You take him. But it's just interesting to look back on it and try to help wrap your head around. Was it really that bad? I don't know. It's worth
look, there were some moments last year where they did some. You could tell there was some good coaching. Winning at Rupp, they beat Clemson.
Winning at Rupp's not that bold anymore.
I guess not. They had Arkansas on the ropes at home. They had Alabama on the ropes at home. They ended up it looks like this year that Lamont Paris is coaching the way he wants to coach, and I don't think that was the case last year. I think he was just trying to get through, and it's hard to put a guy like Jackson into this structure and tell him to get back on defense and all this stuff, which he certainly was terrible at getting back on defense last year. I think connected, like you said, Isaac's probably the right term.
Well, and I also wonder how much of a building block this gives them moving forward in the portal. Like if you're a guy in the portal and you say, hey, what'd you do with BJ Mack? What'd you do with Talon Cooper? What'd you do with Miles Sudi? Like that stuff matters. Like those guys look at what you've done in the past with transfers. Wake Forest is a great example of that. Guys coming to Wake Forest because they want to kind of join that Steve Forbes train. That's where I look at this group moving forward. Like if you get Michi back next year, you get CMB back next year, can you get like what are you looking at in the portal? Like what can you do and how many of these guys can you do this again with? Because I think a lot of people are going to look at South Carolina a whole lot differently than what they did in the past. And that might give you access to a different version of transfer. Now, is that always a good thing? Not necessarily. Sometimes it's you need to find your right guys. But I do wonder if their sell in the portal has changed significantly this year, just based off these guys coming in and being really productive.